Were you very angry?
Oh, absolutely furious. Of course we were. We had plenty to be angry about. We still do.
Kill Men now ask me how. It was a badge that we had mass-made for a meeting.
I mean, we were pretty tough and probably quite alarming.
Yes, we were bloody angry, and some of us still are.
William, stop it. Come on.
Sorry.
Hello ladies and gents, it's Hagbard Celine here, and today we're going to be doing something a little different, but akin to the video that I just did on Jane Elliott. This is going to be one of those where I look at an old documentary that was made, and I reflect on how we're seeing a similar pattern in today. And this one I think even you guys will find amusing, more than frustrating. Although brace, cause the frustrating bit comes first. And, in an attempt to evade what can only be described as the inevitable incoming strike from the BBC, I'll be playing the rest of this video in the upper left-hand corner while I comment, and then pausing it as we go, instead of allowing it to occupy the full screen as it does so, as I will be using large clips from this video to make my points. This first part I kept in simply because I thought it was an interesting mirror of some of the talking points we're seeing from major outlets right now.
In the late 70s, politics in Britain became more extreme. As the state moved dramatically to the right, the left began to fragment. The women's movement was already an established political force, but now a group of women splintered away from the mainstream of feminist thinking.
I personally think that essentially all of this is accurate today. However, instead of splintering from is the radicals, those radicals splintered off and became the mainstream. Interestingly, this documentary actually records that and doesn't seem to correct itself in any way. This next clip, interestingly, highlights the same thing that's occurring today with the modern left and the fragmentation that occurred, and simultaneously operates against the constant refrain that we hear in defense of the women's movement, which is, it wasn't about man-hating. Well, we'll see about that.
Unlike the socialists, who pictured a revolution where the ruling class and the working class would be on opposite sides of the barricades, revolutionary feminists declared war on men.
Now, let's be clear, all of this came from a well-meaning and very reasonable place.
You have to be enraged. I still have the rage, and I still carry the rage. Rage is absolutely fundamental, not anger, it's not strong enough. It has to be rage.
Oh, wait, never mind.
So I was very concerned to problematize the role of men.
Now, I did do some selective editing there, however, it is true that what she has said is that she went from an organization that was focused on women and women's problems to problematizing men. That was her stated goal. But now for our obligatory shitty feminist poetry break.
It was 1978 at the Birmingham plenary when we stepped up to the microphone and said, men are the enemy. Oh, you can't say men are the enemy. You will split the movement wide. We must stick together with the male left. An analysis they will provide. Make the coffee, mind the baby. Don't make such a bloody fuss. Your oppression is due to capitalism. It's got nothing to do with us.
Yes, the history of feminist poetry appears to be the history of poetry scrawled on the inside of 14-year-old girls' journals. Of course, I'm sure that I overreact. That was just one person, one representation of the movement. There's no way that I have a bunch of these people all saying essentially the same thing, right?
Did you feel a sort of generalised animosity towards men at that time?
Certainly, yes. I did feel very, very, very angry with men.
Was a very straightforward, uncomplicated feminism which proclaimed men as the problem. And it was not poverty, it was not class, it was not race.
Well, that all seems to have come from a very healthy emotional place, doesn't it? But I'm sure they also didn't have any accidental leanings left over from their days as, well, self-proclaimed socialists, but I'd argue Marxists, right?
Did you define women as a class?
Yes, absolutely. Women were the equivalent of the working class and men the ruling class.
Under patriarchy?
Under patriarchy, that's right. So we hoped to abolish the class difference.
We were told by men on the left that ours was a bourgeois cause, that we had to wait until the proper revolution before we could then say that women deserved liberation. We didn't agree with that. We knew that actually what we deserved was freedom from the tyranny of male oppression, and we were going to get it by any means necessary.
So we can see from their own admission that it's not some wild conspiracy theory. They admit that essentially what they've done is rebrand Marxism as a gendered issue instead of a class issue, and then held that gendered issue above their original Marxist beliefs, which to me just shows self-obsession, if nothing else. Interestingly, at the end of this, we get to them deeply lamenting the movement that fractured them under essentially the same premises, one we all might be somewhat familiar with.
This was the era of so-called identity politics.
Don't worry, we'll get there yet. But first, let us enjoy some brief clips about political sexuality.
The heterosexual couple is the basic unit of the political structure of male supremacy.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, all P in V is rape. Although in this case I believe they stopped at all P and V is a form of masculine oppression.
I don't need that fucking shit!
It is more efficient by far than keeping women in ghettos, camps, or even sheds at the bottom of the garden.
Yes, this crazy person has compared human sex to concentration camps and prisons.
Any woman who takes part in a heterosexual couple helps to shore up male supremacy by making its foundations stronger.
Giving up fucking for a feminist is about taking up politics seriously. They will resist buying Cape apples because the profits go to South Africa. Obviously, it's more difficult for some feminists to give up penetration, which is so fundamental to the system of oppression which we are fighting.
The revolutionary feminists advocated what they called political lesbianism. This meant becoming a lesbian for political reasons, whether you fancied women or not.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, political rug munching. This was a serious political position that, once again, I'm certain was born from an absolutely healthy state of mind and not due to some form of sociological or peer-based pressure due to this in-group that was forming. Right? Oh, wait.
Were heterosexual women who were on our side. But what I could never understand, and I did resent, was them going home to men at night.
I am Jack's overwhelming sense of surprise that you felt resentment at happily involved couples. Really, I'm shocked.
It just seemed such a contradiction. And often I would get very angry when I would challenge them about this, and they would say, well, that's just the way I am, I just don't fancy women.
To which, of course, like a reasonable human being, you responded, well, that's understandable. As I was born a lesbian and you were born straight, it's completely understandable that you wouldn't wish to partake in that activity. Right?
Having no understanding at all of the fact that sexuality is a social construct, and that we all make choices depending on the way that we want to live in the world we want to see.
So basically, if you don't choose to eat my clam, you're working against all women everywhere, you betrayer. I mean, what can I say? I'm absolutely certain it was a functional political tool to get laid, although admittedly it appears as though Miss Lisa Powers didn't particularly care for that brand of bullshittery, which I'll give her credit for.
My main experience of it was that it was a bit of a pain because there were all these women who suddenly wanted to be lesbians. They didn't actually terribly want to sleep with women, but they sort of felt they ought to pay their dues. And I don't know what it was about me, but for some reason I was the next best thing to a straight man to be tried out on. And I do actually remember one night a perfectly nice woman with whom I'd had nothing but friendly relations, deciding that this was it, she was going to become a proper feminist and go to bed with me. And I remember her stroking my breast and saying, "Oh, It doesn't feel strange at all. And I thought, well, this bloody does to me.
Just keep this moment in your mind. Just remember this woman's complaint when we get to this.
This was the era of so-called identity politics.
Just please, to bask with me in the irony when we finally get there will be the joy that we're all seeking here. But before we get there, which would, in this parallel universe, bring us to modernity, let's have a short review of the childishness and the madness that occurred already in the 1960s and 70s that, just as the Buddhists predict, secular history has determined will occur again. And I think we can all agree we just saw almost everything that we're about to see in the last 3 years or so.
I think we really believed at the time that the vast majority of women would eventually withdraw their energies from men. And then we'd be at the position where men would want to respond against that, and that could create a dangerous situation where there would be barricades between women and men.
Boy, a very realistic and attainable sense of your own power and achievement, right?
Pending the armed struggle, the revolutionaries, along with all good feminists, challenged received notions about how women should look. They wanted to be free from the oppression of making themselves sexually attractive to men.
How many BuzzFeed, Gawker, and Guardian authors do you think thought that they were the first women in history to complain about dressing up or makeup? Just out of curiosity, how many of them do you think thought they were having a novel moment? That they were the first, they were the pioneers of this thought? And how many of them knew that they were just repetitious hacks wishing that they actually had something to rebel against? And for sure, an unwillingness to wear makeup or shave being enforced as some sort of ideological dress code. That's never happened before either, right?
You had to conform to a certain way of looking. There were certain behaviours. There were, no makeup. Oh, heavens, no makeup. The very idea. Women took great pride in not shaving various bits, and those that did have to shave because, they were too hairy to do that, it had to hide the fact that they were shaving.
Yes, even in the 1970s, in the midst of the woman's power movement, it appears that women were body-shaming each other. Oh, but I'm sure you guys were also doing really important political work, right? Like, not silly shit, right?
We got into doing what was it?
Yeah.
Was it that?
Yeah.
Oh, it was that?
That's it.
Yeah, we got into that quite a lot, the feminist vagina thing.
Wait, hold up. You mean the Illuminati sign? Or how about the empowering act of taking back the word women, or history, right? 'Cause his story, you see how it's still male-oriented, right? Gotta get all forms of masculinity right on out of there.
There were women at the time who felt that the word woman or women actually contained the word man and men, and therefore should be changed. That they felt that that the language was so male dominated, so they started to spell women differently, WIMMIN, for example, to completely get rid of the word man inside that.
This version of women is now tagged with a Z and used almost exclusively in the pejorative sense, so congratulations.
The last thing you wanted right in the very core of your identity was the word man, that just completely had to go. So we explored all kinds of exciting things. We talked about ourselves as women, WIMMIN, or women, which is WOBYN. Sometimes we left the B out and then it was WOMYN, but it was all about us. Keep the focus here, keep the focus female, keep the focus feminine.
Whoa, so you're telling me one of the major aspects of feminism was narcissism? Wow, I never realized that before.
What was the B doing in there?
Womb. So it was women, as in, so we turned women, WOMEN, into WOMB, womb, in, YN. Actually, I thought that was rather clever, actually.
Excuse me, first and foremost, that is just a regression of the word towards its original form, and also it is extremely transphobic because, I'll tell you, not all women have wombs, you sick person.
The word history, although I think everybody knew that it didn't really have anything to do with his story, was changed to her story, Herstory.
So I see before me a very intellectual, cerebral, serious political movement, not riddled with emotional appeal and childishness in the slightest, right? No, we're seeing the mature version of feminism here, the one that's harkened back to as the origin cause here. These are essentially the matron saints of feminism.
You could get too precious about it and get to the point where you couldn't say, oh God, you had to say, oh goddess. And you couldn't say, hey, you guys, or you couldn't say, oh boy. So I didn't go too far in the direction of trying to kind of change every single linguistic quirk in myself.
It is interesting to me that to someone who seemed sensible like yourself, this didn't come across as some sort of very bizarre level of purity that was required to be a part of your political movement, considering that you are apparently a fairly reasonable person.
But at the same time, it does irritate me when people just assume that all animals are generically he.
Oh, God, and here I thought maybe you were reasonable. You do understand that you would be at least equally as offended if people just assumed that all or majority of people assumed that animals were all female, because you'd say that you were degrading and viewing all females and animals as equal, right? Well, no, you don't realize that at all. You're a flighty, self-obsessed cunt. But okay, whatever, all of this was mostly just kinda harmless stuff that you'd imagine most 20-somethings or teenagers would get up to. Fine. At least you guys didn't do any real lasting damage to yourselves, your families, no serious emotional scars, just kids being kids, right?
As well as eliminating men from their language, women began to think about eliminating men from their lives.
Were you separatist?
Oh yes, we were separatist.
Okay, well, anytime someone uses the word separatist, it's a reason to give pause, but okay, let's hear it out. Maybe it was mostly harmless, right?
There were times, actually, when we took it to a ridiculous extreme. But often I would walk into town rather than get on a bus, so I didn't have to actually deal with men who would chat to me. I would more or less tell men to piss off in the street if they started to chat. And if I was in a greengrocer's and I was called darling or love, then I would challenge it. I mean, it was well over the top, but at the time it was actually quite exciting.
See, harmless, just exciting kid stuff, just stuff to break up the mundanity and boredom of their average lives. You see, it's kind of like what we're seeing with today's activists. They're no problem, they're just bored kids. They're not going to do anything drastic or extreme or anything, right? We're good.
I mean, we used to spend a lot of time sort of thinking about things like, would it be any different, if we all sort of clubbed together and bought an island somewhere and then all went to live on the island, what would happen? Would it be this utopia, or would women end up having the same sort of hierarchies and oppressive structures that you get in a mixed society?
But you see, just harmless thought experiments, buying an island with your money and living in an all-female society. A little childish, that's fine, but harmless, right? We're fine still.
The most extreme separatists argued that the planet should be reorganised, with men and women living on either side of the equator.
Okay, that's perhaps on the absurd levels of childish thinking and understanding, but fine. Again, it's just a harmless thought experiment. It's not like you guys are hurting anyone with that.
One complication in this women's world was what to do with boy children.
Wait, what?
One complication in this women's world was what to do with boy children.
Well, I don't know how that's complicated. You raise them to be responsible and respectful members of society. What's the complication here exactly?
Some women felt that they didn't want to have kids if those kids were going to be boy kids. and that they'd be afraid of raising sons and having those sons grow up into an abusive, destructive, patriarchal world, that they then had to relinquish control over their children and see their children become men in a society like this. So some women didn't want to have male children for the best of motives.
Boy, it sure does take quite a dosage of the ideological Kool-Aid to describe what you just did and then tag it with the best of motives. I'm not sure how you've done that in your brain, and I retract my previous statements about your reasonableness.
I'd been to some events, oh God, when was this? Maybe early 80s, where women who had sons weren't allowed to leave their sons in the creche. You could only leave your daughters in the creche. That just really wound me up, stuff like that. That for me was as stupid as people only having female cats.
This tells me two things. First, that you went to this event and likely still attended it despite this misgiving you had, and you know people crazy enough to care about the sex of their cats, and associated with them freely enough that it was one of the first things that came to your head. Stunning.
A lot of radical feminists felt that you should give them up. There were actually women who were saying you should give up boy children. I just can't believe it now. It was so cruel and so horrible.
At least she has the good graces to look back on this moment in shame. She seems to have kept some of her paraphernalia, if you will, but she does appear to understand that this was an ugly moment. And I can only hope that sooner rather than later some of the people currently operating within the system realize the same.
Sue O'Sullivan's two sons were very young when she left her family to live as a lesbian.
I left my sons with my husband, and I went back and would stay there three times, 4 times a week, and so I was never out of contact and never not caring for them at all. But it did pull me apart at the time, and it certainly obviously pulled other people in my family apart too.
Okay, fine. You had a major lifestyle change. You reassessed your sexuality. You still stayed involved in their lives. It wasn't just for ideological reasons. Fine, I'm not going to get mad.
The reason I left, and left both my children, was that boys weren't allowed. And I could not, and I would not, even today. I mean, I obviously find this quite painful, but I could not leave my son and take my daughter. So my feeling was that it would be better for the children to stay together with their father. There's no doubt their father loved them.
So that was a huge decision to become a separatist in that context.
I didn't choose to become a separatist. It kind of went with my politics, and it went with that stage.
You, ma'am, however, make me wish to still be a Judeo-Christian believer so that I could actually rest with the hope that you would burn in some form of an eternal hell where you deserve to be. However, I'm forced to just recognize that you're a shit human that gets to walk among us in this plane of existence, like so many others. But to calm down, let's have a brief comedic interlude here.
Penile imperialism was the rule and control over women under male dominance through the wielding of the penis.
Good sir, I claim this land in the name of my penis, in the name of the Queen of Penis, in the name of penile imperialism. Resist, and I shall have at you with my knob.
But, of course, to return to the subject, there was their very healthy perceptions of human sexuality and the pornography industry, as captured in the following.
At the heart of the Rev Fem's analysis of male violence lay pornography. For them, pornographic imagery endorsed and encouraged violent behaviour.
The statistics on violence towards women and pornography be damned, it's certainly doing damage. We don't know how, even though the statistics say otherwise. It must be doing damage. I don't like seeing it. It makes me uncomfortable.
But, sir, how do you know what's in it if looking at it offends you?
Well, we look at it in group.
No, I'm not kidding. That was their ideological response to how one surveys pornography. You bring it into the group and you discuss what you're seeing. Disturbed.
One of the things we did in the London group was consciousness raising around pornography, and we had rules about looking at pornography. We'd acquire pornography, preferably not buying it, giving money to pornographers, but actually asking brothers and others who held pornography.
Just a brief interjection, even if you directly weren't doing so, by taking it from those who had legally acquired it, you were still supporting the pornography industry. Never mind, I know economics and logic isn't your strong point.
And we looked at it, but we'd only look at it in the group.
Seriously, how fucking weird is that? To, like, go out and acquire your brother's porn to bring in and read with your feminist group? I mean, that had to be damaging in the long run. I'm just saying that had to be damaging. That's like your pastor saying, "Alright kids, now don't let Satan take you over with the porno, bring it in and read it with the group to make sure you don't get no unclean urges." But on to the larger point of this, and on to where I started to see serious parallels. Throughout the whole thing, you saw many of the talking points that you've seen reflected in modernity, reflected onto this period. It's very indicative of that cyclical nature. However, now we get to the very, very specific portion of the program that deals with how the feminist movement reacted to identity politics. Or, as they'd say it now, how white feminism deals with intersectionality. This will be the longest uninterrupted clip. I would ask you all to just sit back and bask in the glow of what it is to reap what you sow. Bask in the overwhelming glory that is simply watching a movement that dissected another movement through the same techniques be dissected. It's amazing. And doubly amazing if you realize that we get the grand privilege of bearing witness to this occurring in its 2.0 form.
By the early 80s, feminism had well and truly come of age, but was about to enter a second phase. Black women, working class women and disabled women felt that their oppressions had not been taken into account by the largely white middle-class pioneers of the women's movement. This was the era of so-called identity politics. Calling yourself a feminist was no longer sufficient.
I'm a working class black woman.
Oh, I've said speaking as a Jewish lesbian.
I would always identify myself as a black lesbian.
Oh Lord, you couldn't be involved politically in the 80s and not get involved in identity politics. There was a points system. It varied a bit. You had to work out what the local points system was, like the local currency. But there was always a points system.
All over the place, women were discovering that their grandmothers were Jewish and that they'd only found out on their deathbed, or that somebody was third generation Irish and took it on as if they were still, living in Kilkenny, eating potatoes and working on a farm.
When the first black women came on to Spare Rib, I think they were in a very difficult position. I don't think we were so crude as to say, okay, you go and do all the stuff with black women, we'll carry on the way we are. But we did, I think simply by having them on the collective, it would make things better. And I don't think that anybody predicted that it would make things a hell of a lot worse. We knew from letters that were coming from women who lived there that they desperately wanted an article written on women in El Salvador. They didn't have the time to write it. Most of them couldn't speak English. They really wanted this woman to write about their predicament, and she was being told she couldn't because she wasn't from El Salvador. Now that is ridiculous.
Because with the women, readership was very broad, and people were continually writing into us and saying, "You're not representing us." And you just put your head in your hands and say, "Well, who are we representing?"
And we didn't know how to deal with it as largely white feminist movement. We didn't know how to cope with that. And so we turned quite a lot on ourselves.
They always used to turn up at the feminist book fairs and say, "We can't get in," and yeah.
Were you supportive of that?
Is this off the record? I can't remember. I just remember they used to sit outside in their wheelchairs and be a bit sort of threatening.
Well, I think like a lot of black women, disabled women suddenly got a voice and got power by virtue of the fact that they were disabled. And if you weren't disabled, just like white women couldn't, you did not say a damn word when a disabled woman spoke. That was that.
It was quite aggressive, and it was very hysterical and very emotional. Now, I would defend the hysteria and emotion because to be excluded is not nice.
If it wasn't one thing and it was another. I mean, if it wasn't disabled women feeling they were excluded, it was working class women feeling they were excluded. And you just felt, why am I doing this if I'm just going to get bullied? Because that's what it felt like. In the end, it felt like bullying and harassment.
Identity politics were used by some people as a way to shut others up or for them to gain power. I mean, this will always happen. And it was not, in the end, positive. I can't think of anything good to say.
There is something sort of Lord of the Flies-ish about it.
It was, it became quite sinister. It was a bit Lord of the Fliesy, and it was a bit like, I mean, I've used the word fundamentalisms. It was a bit like a bit of a cult, where cult members end up sort of, excluding each other or killing each other or, just sort of turning on and turning on and turning on each other, as I said, until there's only you left.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, so it was, and so it shall be. It appears that as soon as one introduces identity politics into any political movement, it immediately devolves into this us versus them, my in-group versus your in-group, Lord of the Flies type scenario, even if not carried to that extreme. However, I think we can all agree that we're witnessing this occur right now in various groups and subgroups around the world. This subsecting into various versions of identity and then deciding in that very moment of having found and forged that identity, that identity is more important than anything else or any other aspect of yourself or any political movement you could possibly be involved with. Again, I consider it political narcissism. No more, no less. I would bet most people who are active members of some form of an activist movement for women's empowerment have never seen the documentary that these clips were pulled from, or heard the stories that are very clearly filled with some regret, and looking back and realizing that they were either being very childish or very, very cruel, and sometimes both. That's it for me. As usual, stay safe, good luck, and goodbye.